They told us the first fireworks were fired in 1777, a celebration of blood and flame to honor the one-year anniversary of America's declaration. They never told us what else was lit that night. The official history says Ashbridge, Pennsylvania was founded in 1765 and disappeared in a wildfire 12 years later. But towns don't just disappear. They burn, they collapse, they rot, but they leave bones. Ashbridge left nothing, no ruins, no graves, no map markings after 1777. It was like the land itself swallowed it whole. No one really talks about the original Ashbridge anymore. Now there's just New Ashbridge, about 3 miles east, sitting pretty on old ground. A retirement town in the woods, thick with flag wavers and antique shops. If it weren't for the 4th of July, no one would give a damn about the place. But we throw the biggest fireworks show in the whole county, maybe the whole state. At least that's what the banners say. I wasn't interested in patriotism. I didn't hang flags or say the pledge. I just liked fire. Always had. Ever since I was a kid, I'd light sparklers and hold them too long, letting the sparks lick at my fingers. My mom said it was a phase. My therapist called it a control issue. My ex said it was because I didn't feel anything unless I was hurting. She wasn't wrong. This year I volunteered for the fireworks crew, not because I gave a shit about America, but because I wanted to be close to the blast. I was paired up with Mike, a guy in his 30s who wore sunglasses at night and always smelled like menthols, and Harold, a Vietnam-era fossil who still used words that made everyone uncomfortable. We were in charge of setting up the launch mortars behind the high school's football field. It was hot that day. Sweat-soaked t-shirts, sunburned backs, and the stink of cheap burgers from food trucks lingering in the air. While Mike laid the wiring and Harold adjusted the angles on the tubes, I went into the supply shed to grab more launch powder, and that's when I saw the box. It was shoved behind a pile of plastic bins, wrapped in a moldy tarp, wooden, hand-carved, and sealed with a rusted iron clasp. It didn't match any of the modern equipment. Looked like something out of a museum. Faded lettering was burned into the top. Ashbridge Township, Centennial Fire Display, 1876. It was locked, but the clasp crumbled under my thumb. Inside were hand-drawn blueprints, ink faded to brown, rolled tight and bound with brittle twine. The paper smelled like rotten charcoal. I unrolled them on the floor and felt my stomach tighten. It wasn't just a fireworks plan, it was art. Sketches of rocket arrays, starbursts, powder mixes. But something else too. Symbols, spirals, things that looked like eyes and teeth arranged in geometric circles beneath each mortar tube. Mike wandered in and looked over my shoulder. "What the hell is that?" "Old show," I said. "Centennial thing, 1876. He grinned. "You thinking what I'm thinking?" "No," I said, but I was. We both were. We rebuilt the layout from those plans. Positioned the mortars the way the old blueprint showed, down to the exact spacing and firing order. I even copied the strange symbols onto the bases of the tubes using chalk. I told myself it was for aesthetic. Historical accuracy, but something about it made the back of my teeth hurt. We didn't tell Harold. He wouldn't have gone for it. Said the old shit was cursed. By nightfall, the field was packed. Families on lawn chairs, kids with glowing necklaces, couples lying on blankets looking up at the empty sky. Everyone drunk on nostalgia and sugar. The speakers blasted Lee Greenwood and Springsteen while we stood behind the bleachers with the launch controls. I could smell the smoke from the sparklers. I could feel the weight of the box back at the shed still open, like something inside it was watching. The first mortar launched at 9:13 p.m., a red comet that burst into a wheel of gold. The crowd cheered. The second exploded in a fan of white sparks. The third hissed blue. By the 7th, I noticed the air was changing. Cooler, heavier. The sky felt thick, like it was pressing down. Even Mike seemed to notice. He lit a cigarette but didn't inhale. He just stared out past the trees. The finale fired at 9:26 p.m. 3 massive bursts in quick succession, red, blue, gold. The last one came late. A hiss, then silence. Then a blast so loud the ground shook beneath our boots. Kids screamed. The crowd erupted into applause. And then everything went quiet. No cheering, no music, just windless silence. Harold muttered something and stepped forward toward the field. "That ain't right," he said. Mike laughed nervously. "What's not right? That was the best show we've ever done." But Harold was staring past the tree line. So was I. There was something moving between the trunks, not branches, not wind. A shape, low and wide and black against the darkness, like smoke, but wrong. Smoke that moved with purpose. I blinked and it was gone. Then the ash started to fall. Not snow, not dust, ash. Warm, soft, and falling thick like a blizzard. I caught a flake on my arm. It burned, not like heat, like acid. I wiped it away and saw a thin welt rise on my skin. People on the field started coughing, screaming. I saw a woman in a red dress try to run. She was there 1 second and then gone. Not tripped, not tackled, just gone. Like something pulled her through the grass into the earth. Mike shouted and started backing away. I followed. Harold didn't move. He stared into the falling ash, whispering something. His eyes looked empty. I reached for him, but something shot out of the ground, fast, like a black tendril of soot, and wrapped around his leg. He screamed once before it pulled him down. His body hit the dirt and vanished like it had never been there. Mike ran. I ran. We didn't look back. The ash fell harder. I drove straight home, locked every door, and turned off every light. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. I tried to call my dad. No signal. Tried 911. Static. Even the radio was dead. I couldn't stop thinking about the box. I went back to the shed, heart hammering, and pulled the remaining contents out. Beneath the blueprints was a false bottom. Inside it was a journal, leather-bound, pages curled with age. The handwriting was tight, panicked. The first entry was dated June 29th, 1876. "We have opened the mound. The natives called it Aisha, the place of black fire. Inside was no gold, no bones, only dust. It burns, it burns." The next few pages described the preparations for the 100-year anniversary fireworks. They used the black dust from the mound, said it ignited easier than powder, burned hotter. But then came this, July 3rd, 1876, we saw it. A shape in the flame. It moves through the trees. It whispered through the bonfire. It knows our names. We have disturbed its rest. We lit the sky and called it forth. July 4th, 1876. The town is gone. I am writing from the root cellar beneath the church. I have sealed it for now. But the ash falls. It falls even underground. The more fire we give it, the stronger it becomes. I sealed the book and stared at the chalk symbols we had copied. They weren't decoration. They were markers, warnings. We had recreated the exact show from the centennial celebration, the one that destroyed Ashbridge. We had called it back. The ash was still falling outside. I stepped onto the porch and saw the sky glowing red, not from fireworks, from something rising, something wide and low and seething, a mass of black, crawling smoke. It had no eyes, but I could feel it looking at me. My blood froze. It remembered the men who had lit the sky with its bones, and it remembered their bloodlines. And now it remembered me. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't even lie down. I sat in the middle of my room with a baseball bat in one hand and the soldier's journal in the other, listening to the wind for any sign of movement. But there was no wind, just that constant dry patter of falling ash against the roof. Around 3 a.m, I thought I heard something scrape along the outer wall of the house. Not an animal, not claws, like wood being sanded, slow and deliberate. I stood frozen in place, breath shallow, the taste of sulfur thick on my tongue. I wanted to scream, but I didn't trust what might hear it. When the sun finally came up, the world looked different. The sky was pale orange, like a light bulb about to burst. Everything outside was coated in gray. Ash blanketed the grass, the mailboxes, the sidewalks. It clung to windows like frost, hiding the shape of the thing beneath it all. I opened the front door slowly, my breath catching as I stepped onto the porch. The air stank, burned metal and something sweet rotting underneath. I could see my neighbor's dog lying stiff in their yard, half covered in ash, eyes open and dry as glass. Something about it didn't look right, like it wasn't just dead, like it had been emptied. Down the block, a pickup truck was idling with the driver's door open. I approached slowly, calling out. No answer. Inside, the keys were still in the ignition, the engine humming. But the driver's seat was empty. No blood, no footprints. Just a smear of fine gray dust in the shape of a man's outline. It looked like whoever was there had been melted into soot and blown away. That's when I noticed the burn marks, trails along the sidewalk, narrow as snakes but branching like roots. They radiated outward from the football field like veins. Whatever came out of the ground last night had spread. I heard footsteps and spun around, bat raised. It was Mike, limping toward me from behind a trash bin. His eyes were wide and bloodshot. His hands were shaking. Jesus, he croaked. Jake, it got them. All of them. What got them? I saw it, he whispered, voice hoarse. Under the field, after you ran. It came up like smoke, but it had shape. It had form. Harold, he didn't even scream long. It pulled him under like a sinkhole. I barely got away. Hid in the dumpster. I didn't even breathe. I nodded and pulled him inside. We sat at the kitchen table like survivors of a house fire, covered in ash and disbelief. I showed him the journal. At first, he laughed. A dry, broken laugh, but as he read, his face paled. They knew, he muttered. Those old bastards knew what they found back then, and they still used it. Used what? I asked, even though I already knew. Something that shouldn't burn, he said. Some kind of powder, not gunpowder, not charcoal. It came from a burial mound. We used it, Jake. That old box in the shed, it still had some. You poured it into the mortar tubes, remember? That wasn't black powder. That was it. I swallowed hard. I had poured it. I remembered the way it stuck to my fingers, how it shimmered slightly in the light like flakes of obsidian. I thought it was just old, maybe damp, but it had clung to me like it was alive. We need to tell someone, I said. Police, fire department, National Guard, anyone. Mike just looked at me. You think they'll believe we summoned some ash-dwelling demon by reenacting a historical fireworks show? I stood up. They'll believe something happened. Half the town's probably missing. So we went. Downtown looked like the day after a bombing. The storefronts were shuttered. Some windows were broken. Ash was everywhere, smeared across glass like a handprint, settled into cracks of brick and sidewalk. We passed a man sitting on a bench with his head bowed. I thought he was asleep until I saw the way his chest wasn't moving. I tapped his shoulder and he crumbled like paper, just collapsed into a pile of soft gray powder. Mike puked into a gutter. At the police station, the lights were on, but the doors were locked. We banged on them until someone inside finally appeared. Deputy Loring, a good guy, used to give out baseball cards instead of speeding tickets. His hands trembled as he unlocked the door and let us in. "What the hell is going on out there?" he hissed. "Half the town's phones are dead, the radio's out, and people are disappearing." I showed him the journal. He didn't even question it. Just read. Slowly, silently. Then he set it down and looked at us like we were already dead. "I'll call in a state alert," he said. "Evacuation order, something. But if this thing is real, and God help me, I think it is, we're already too late." That's when the lights flickered. All at once, every bulb in the room popped. A rush of hot air blew through the vents, and I saw ash curling through the light fixtures like it was alive. Loring reached for his gun, but it was too late. The station floor began to crack. From beneath the tile, a dark shape surged upward, ash black and undulating, like a massive eel made of smoke and embers. Loring fired. The bullets did nothing. The shape split in half and swarmed him. He screamed as it wrapped around his arms, his face, pulled him inward like clay sucked through a straw. We ran. Back onto the street, past the school, down alleyways. I didn't know where we were going until I saw the church steeple. The journal had said the man in 1876 had sealed himself in the root cellar beneath the church. If it protected him then, maybe it would work now. The door to the church was open. Empty pews, a broken organ, a Bible smoldering on the pulpit. We sprinted down the nave and found the trapdoor behind the altar. I yanked it open. A stone staircase disappeared into darkness. Mike hesitated. "Are you sure?" The floor behind us cracked with a sound like splitting wood. I shoved him in and followed. The door slammed shut. It was cold in the root cellar, damp, the kind of cold that sank into your bones and whispered to your blood to stop moving. I lit my phone flashlight. The cellar was lined with old stone, reinforced with iron beams. Symbols were scratched into the walls, same as the ones on the blueprint. They glowed faintly when the light passed over them. "This is it," I whispered. "This is where he hid." We stayed there for hours, maybe a day. We didn't talk, just listened. Sometimes we heard movement above, shifting weight, soft thuds, scratching. But it never broke through. It couldn't. I started reading more of the journal while we waited. The last few pages were shaky, barely legible. The fire does not burn wood. It burns spirit, memory, name. It remembers what you are, what your blood has done. It sees through lineage and calls it back. The more you honor what was stolen, the stronger it becomes. It wasn't just about the mound. It was about what they did to get the powder. The 1776 celebration had used materials taken from a sacred burial site, a place never meant to be opened. They burned the remains of the dead for spectacle. And in doing so, they had awakened something old, something that fed on reverence. The more we honored the past, the more we brought it back. I closed the book and turned to Mike. "It's tied to the celebration. That's what feeds it. The fireworks, the ritual, the memory." He nodded slowly. "So what happens next year?" I didn't have an answer. We stayed another night. On the second day, the sound stopped. The ash no longer fell through the cracks. We waited longer just to be sure, then crept out through the trapdoor. The town was silent. No birds, no cars, no people. Just layers of soft gray dust covering everything. We walked the streets like survivors of a war we didn't understand. We saw faces frozen in glass, imprints of the dead in the store windows like the moment they vanished had been burned into the world. There were no bodies. We didn't talk about it again. Not really. Mike left town that week, moved to Florida. I stayed. Someone had to remember. That was last year. Now it's June 30th again. And the town council just announced that this year's 4th of July fireworks will be bigger than ever. They even restored the old plans, said they found them in a historical box out behind the school. They're calling it a tribute to our past. I haven't slept in 3 days, because I know what's coming, and this time it remembers me by name. I watched the town come back to life like nothing had ever happened. They cleared the ash with pressure washers and leaf blowers, painted new flags on the lamp posts, replaced the old firework mortar tubes with shiny steel rigs sponsored by some local veterans group. New banners hung over Main Street, new ash bridge 250th, a celebration of heritage. No one remembered what happened. Not really. That's the part that scared me the most. They found evidence that a gas leak caused some chemical burns and ash discharge. The news said a nearby transformer exploded. A few folks went missing, but no one in power called it what it was. No memorial, no warning. Just another tidy story patched up for the papers, sealed in a box, never spoken of again. But I remembered. I remembered everything. I'd lived it. I'd watched people turn to ash. I'd seen the shape slither beneath the surface of the world, alive and vast and ancient. It hadn't just killed people. It had absorbed them, like smoke wrapping around a soul and pulling it inward. And now, almost a year later, it was stirring again. I tried to warn them. I printed flyers, handed out copies of the journal, tried to get it posted online, but something always stopped it. Emails never sent. Files became corrupted. My printer jammed every time I typed certain words. I posted one scanned page of the journal to a subreddit. It got removed within minutes. Reason: promoting historical falsehoods. Even when I printed physical copies and passed them around in person, people just laughed. Some old-timers called me disrespectful, said I was dishonoring the town's founding. One guy from the Historical Society accused me of trying to ruin one of the few wholesome things this country has left. Wholesome. They called what we did last year wholesome. No one remembered the vanished. Not really. No one remembered Mike. I hadn't heard from him since September. His phone went dead. Emails bounced. I called a storage facility in Tampa where he'd supposedly been working, and they said they'd never heard of him. No forwarding address, no record of employment. He was gone, like everyone else. It started small again this year, the dreams. They came every night. I'd wake up in the dark, soaked in sweat, tasting ash on my tongue. I dreamed of flame without heat, of a sky that didn't hold stars but pulsed like a throat. I saw faces burned into clouds writhing in silence. Every time I tried to scream in the dream, I'd wake with the imprint of soot on my chest, like someone had pressed their hand into my ribs and tried to pull me inward. On July 1st, I found a flake of the black powder under my fingernail. I hadn't touched it since last year. I burned my clothes, tore out the carpet where I'd seen the ash gather in a small spiral by my bed, boarded up the windows, but it didn't matter. The thing doesn't live in the dirt or the air. It lives in memory. It lives in repetition. And every time we celebrate what those early settlers did, what they burned, we invite it back. The more I tried to forget, the more I remembered. The journal entries had said it fed on legacy, bloodlines, tradition. That meant it didn't just need a celebration. It needed people tied to the original act, descendants. I traced my lineage back through a public records database out of curiosity months ago. My great-great-great-grandfather was the one who built the mortar platforms in 1777. I was part of it, born into it. I tried to leave town on July 2nd, packed my car, filled the tank, hit the highway. I didn't make it past the Ashbridge County line. A thick fog rolled across the road like a curtain, and beneath it, the black tendrils began to twitch. I saw them in the rearview mirror, crawling over the road like burned vines, reaching up toward the exhaust pipe, the trunk, the the back tires. I reversed until I was back inside town limits, and the fog vanished like it had never been there. I was trapped, just like before. That night, I drove to the old church and tried to break back into the root cellar. The trapdoor was sealed shut, not with locks or boards, but with something else, something underneath the wood, pressed tight from the other side. It was breathing. I heard it. The slow exhale of something slumbering beneath the stone, waiting. On July 3rd, I saw them. The faces. The ones that had been taken last year. They were walking the streets, smiling, waving small flags, wearing red, white, and blue. But they weren't right. Their eyes were wrong, too still, too wide. Their mouths hung in permanent smiles like stretched latex. They weren't people anymore. They were placeholders, puppets made of memory, worn by the thing like costumes. At the hardware store, one of them waved to me. It was Mr. Dell, the retired gym teacher. He'd been among the missing. But here he was, pushing a cart of sparklers and Roman candles. "Gearing up for the big show?" he asked, voice cheerful. "Where have you been?" I asked, my voice shaking. He tilted his head. "Oh, you know, around. Been busy, helping prepare." "For what?" His smile widened. "For the rebirth." Then he walked away. That night I tried one last time to leave. I walked the railroad tracks for miles, through thick woods until the town lights faded behind me. It was pitch black except for the moonlight. Then I heard a boom, a single firework, far behind me, from the football field, even though it was hours too early. I looked up, and the sky was no longer black. It was orange, pulsing like embers. The ash started falling again. The trees around me went silent. No insects, no birds, just the soft hiss of falling dust and the faint sound of something massive moving beneath the earth. I ran back to town. Tomorrow is the 4th. The banners are already hung. The mortars are stacked, painted red, white, and blue. People have taken their places. All of them, real or replaced, I can't tell anymore. The town is full of smiles that don't blink, hands that don't shake, eyes that watch without seeing. I went back to the church, tried to pray. I wasn't religious, but I didn't know what else to do. Inside, the air was thick with incense and heat. The stained glass glowed with unnatural light, flickering like it was being lit from beneath the floor. I approached the altar and saw something carved into it, fresh, with a knife or a nail. It wasn't there last year. It was my name, and beneath it something that made my stomach turn. A date, tomorrow's. I've made my choice. If the thing feeds on fire, I'll give it something it won't digest, something rotten, something corrupted. I've rigged the mortars, packed them with steel instead of stars, filled the black powder tubes with salt and rusted nails. I've carved protective glyphs into the field where I'll stand, not to protect me, but to bind it, to slow it, to give me enough time, because when the show starts tomorrow, I'll be the last one standing on that field. Everyone else is gone, or changed, or waiting for their cue. But I remember. I know what happened, and I know how it ends. I slept with the lights on, if you can call what I did that night sleep. More like waiting in the dark, eyes half shut, fingers twitching every time the house creaked. I kept expecting to hear footsteps, slow, deliberate, padded in ash. I expected to see the not people again, smiling through my window, waiting. But no one came, not until morning. The first thing I heard when I stepped outside was music, marching band music, warbled and slow, like an old vinyl recording played at half speed. The source echoed from the town square where the parade was already underway. That's how it always began, every year. Kids throwing candy from decorated floats, someone dressed as Uncle Sam on stilts, the mayor giving his annual speech from a flatbed truck. Except this year, the floats were too clean. The kids didn't blink. Uncle Sam's eyes were empty sockets painted black, and the mayor's voice echoed like it wasn't coming from his throat, but from deep underground. I walked among them, unnoticed. Everywhere I looked, people wore masks of who they had once been. I saw Mrs. Gill from the library waving a flag made of old skin. Coach Reamer holding a balloon that pulsed like a lung. One of the floats displayed a giant papier-mâché version of the old Ashbridge Mound. The announcer's voice croaked through the loudspeaker. And here we have a tribute to the first settlers who lit the sky in 1777 and birthed a new fire into the world. Let us remember them by name. I stopped walking because he said my name, Jacob Caro, descendant of the flame bearer. Ashbridge's blood, the one who will light the sky again tonight. I turned and ran. The parade didn't stop. The music kept playing, but I knew now what they were waiting for, me. The football field was already set. Mortars lined up like artillery, flags staked into the ground, and a massive wooden effigy at the center of the grass, 20 feet tall, shaped like a tree made of bones and wire and charred wood. It was crowned with antlers and shrouded in strips of scorched red, white, and blue fabric. At its base was a name carved in charcoal, Caro. That was my legacy. I walked the perimeter of the field, laying the last of my salt circles, driving iron spikes into the earth at the corners. Symbols burned into plywood sheets arranged into a grid. The blueprint was an inversion of the original, a ritual meant not to summon, but to bind, not to glorify, but to cut off the thing's breath. The crowd began to gather at sundown. They moved silently, all of them, hundreds of them, some I recognized, some I didn't. Maybe they'd never been from Ashbridge at all. Maybe the thing was filling the seats with whatever it had left, wearing bodies like borrowed coats, a sea of perfect smiles and dead eyes. I took my place by the launch station, a single ignition switch. A countdown clock ticked behind me, digital, cold, blinking closer to zero. I looked up. The sky pulsed. Orange veins spread across the clouds. Not lightning, something alive, something pressing against the membrane of the sky, waiting to fall through. 10 minutes to launch. Then 5. I turned the key, and I prayed, not for mercy, not for survival. I prayed that the thing would feel it when it burned. The first mortar fired at exactly 9:13 p.m. It wasn't color, it wasn't stars. It was steel and iron and salt exploding into the air like shrapnel, tearing through the sky, ripping holes in the orange. The crowd didn't cheer, they screamed. The second barrage struck the effigy. The wood caught fire, but it didn't burn like normal wood. It bled. Thick black sap dripped from its joints, and the antlers cracked as the fire crawled down its legs like it was resisting. Then the ground began to shake. The field cracked open at the center, not like an earthquake, but like something was unfolding. A mouth, a wound. The grass peeled back. Beneath it, ash boiled like water, forming shapes, limbs, jaws, smoke spun into fingers. The thing rose, not in one shape, in many, hands made of soot and teeth. Faces formed of smoke and glowing coals. It was not one creature. It was every person it had taken, twisting together, remembering the shape of the human, but only as a mask. It moved like fire. It screamed without sound, and it knew me. It reached for the sky and found the fire I'd given it poisoned. It recoiled. The binding glyphs glowed bright white. The salt lines caught flame. The ash swirled in place, trying to flee, but the iron nails held. It was trapped. For now, I stepped into the center of the field. The crowd stared without blinking. I raised the final ignition trigger, the failsafe I'd kept hidden beneath my coat. It wasn't hooked to fireworks. It was wired to the main gas line under the field. I heard it then, not a voice, not language, but a pressure behind my eyes, a plea. It spoke in memory. It showed me the first celebration in 1777. The settlers lighting the sky, the children dancing, the mound breaking open, slow and quiet, spilling ash into their lungs. It had not asked to be woken. It had been fed, for centuries, again and again. We burned it alive for the sake of tradition, and now it burned us back. But there was one thing it had never known. Self-immolation. I slammed the trigger. The earth erupted. The gas line blew with the force of 10,000 pounds of pressure. Flames swallowed the field. The effigy exploded into splinters. The mortars shattered. Salt lines flared like sun rays. And at the heart of it all, the ash screamed. The crowd burned. One by one, the faces went up in flame, not skin but memory. They peeled away like paper, like masks caught in a furnace. The sky turned white, then black, then silence. When I woke up, the field was cold. The grass was gone, just soot and glass and twisted metal. No bodies, no bones. But I was alive, somehow, alone. The town was empty, no parade, no homes, no flags, nothing, only ash. I walked for miles. Every street ended in nothing, like the edges of the world had folded inward. Then I saw it, a sign, "Welcome to Ashbridge, founded 1765, the same sign I'd seen my whole life, but wrong, because the date wasn't 2025 anymore. It was 1777, and beneath it, written in wet soot, "The celebration never ends." I stood frozen before that sign for what felt like hours, the silence around me pressing in like a vice. My legs felt like they didn't belong to me. The sky above, no longer black, no longer orange, was white, bleached, sterile. The air held no temperature. There were no sounds. No wind, no birds, no breath, only me, and the ash. I backed away from the sign slowly, reading the words again as if I'd misread them the first time. The celebration never ends. But they didn't just look like soot, they were written in something thicker, oilier. I reached out and touched a letter, and it smeared, warm. When I brought my fingers to my nose, I nearly vomited. Blood. Human blood, half coagulated, still warm. I turned around, and the town was whole again. But wrong. The streets were brick, not pavement. Gas lamps flickered in place of streetlights. The storefronts were wooden, their windows leaded glass. Horse-drawn carriages stood in place of cars. And people, real people, walked those streets, but they moved like actors stuck in a loop. Repeating gestures. Laughing at nothing, waving at no one. Faces I didn't recognize, but that I somehow remembered. The year was 1777, but I wasn't in the past. I was in the echo, the memory, the residue of what the thing had built over centuries of being fed and celebrated. This was the form it wore now, not one of ash or smoke, but of tradition. A world built from endless replication, a prison shaped like pride, like patriotism. I was inside its ritual. I wandered through the town square and watched the loop begin again. A boy ran by waving a tiny flag. A woman dropped an apple pie. A firework misfired and someone laughed. Then the boy ran by again. The pie fell again. The laughter. Again. The same people, the same actions, a clock chime, a cheer. No one saw me. I wasn't part of it. I was a flaw in the pattern. The first crack appeared in the sky at precisely 9:13 p.m. It didn't look like a crack, more like a seam tearing. The bleached sky darkened at the edges and folded inward, like someone was peeling wallpaper off a room. Behind it was blackness. Not space, not night, something deeper. And from that blackness, it began to reach again. Tendrils, not smoke this time, not ash, but memories. Glimpses. My mother holding a sparkler in her hand on my 6th birthday. Mike laughing at something Harold said. That girl from school I used to love before she moved away. A road trip with my dad. My first firecracker. My first match. All of it twisted together, reaching down, trying to wrap itself around me in warmth. It wanted me to stay. Because I remembered. Because I felt. I dropped to my knees, clutching my head. My thoughts didn't feel like mine anymore. Every memory I'd ever had was being sifted through, rearranged. It didn't want to destroy me. It wanted to include me, to turn me into a piece of the loop, just another figure waving a flag, trapped in this cycle. Fuel, but I still had the journal. Somehow it was in my coat pocket, even after the explosion. Pages charred but intact. My fingers bled as I turned them, heat radiating from the words. And on the last page, something I'd never noticed before, a line etched not in ink, but in something like fire. The fire forgets only when it is forgotten. The celebration kept it alive, the remembering, the reenacting, the honoring. I looked around me, at the fake 1777 buildings, at the perfect outfits, at the fireworks mortars about to launch in unison. If I wanted to kill it, I had to kill everything, every ritual, every banner, every loop, every tradition built on top of the ash. The only way to kill the fire was to erase the match that struck it. I stood, walked forward into the center of the square. The people didn't notice me at first, even as I began to shout, "Stop celebrating, this isn't your town, it isn't real, it's feeding on you." No one stopped. The loop continued. The boy ran by with his flag. The pie fell again. The cheer. Then they began to turn. Not all at once, just a few at a time. Heads snapping toward me, smiles widening. Not like the puppets from the year before. These were worse. Their skin peeled at the edges. Their eyes rolled backward, revealing hollow sockets filled with embers. They walked toward me slowly. I tore a flag down and lit it on fire. The first one screamed. The scream was not human. It was the town, the entire town, every building, every brick, every parade float. The church steeple shook. The grass turned black. The sky ruptured, and underneath it all the ground began to bleed. I ran through the loop and smashed what I could. Broke mortar tubes, toppled the wooden cannons, ripped bunting from windows and threw it into the fire. The people, the not people, chased me. They didn't run. They moved like statues gliding over the earth, closing in like fog. I ducked into the church, the same one from the real world. The trapdoor was there again, and this time it was open. I climbed down and found myself not in a cellar, but in a tunnel that breathed. The walls pulsed. The air reeked of blood and sulfur. The deeper I went, the louder the sound became. A heartbeat, not mine, not human. I followed it until the walls gave way to a cavern. At the center of the cavern sat the true shape of the thing. It wasn't a monster, not in the way people think. It was a furnace, a pit wide and black rimmed with bone. Inside, the memories of everyone it had ever taken danced like fireflies. Faces, voices, songs, birthdays, kisses, screams, all drifting in circles, looped in agony. Fuel, and at the center, an ember, no bigger than a fist, the core. It pulsed with light as I approached. It knew I was there. It opened to me, not in malice, but in invitation. "Give me your flame," it said without speaking. "Give me your name." And I almost did. I felt it pulling, offering me peace, offering to erase the pain, the guilt, the memories. But I didn't step forward. I pulled the journal from my coat. I threw it into the pit. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, the ember cracked. The fire sputtered. The looping voices twisted. And then the scream came. It wasn't pain. It was rage. The fire lashed upward, trying to claw itself into form. But without the memory of its birth, without the record, the ritual, the binding text, it had no shape. It convulsed, imploded, and then it went out. Not with a bang, but with a silence so total it felt like dying. I opened my eyes to gray. Not ash, just fog, the real world. The football field, burned but intact, no banners. No people, no mortars, just grass and wind. The sun was rising, and I was alone, truly alone. No one ever returned. The town was found months later, completely depopulated. Buildings intact, food still warm on tables, no signs of struggle, just gone. FBI came, CDC, some hazmat teams. They blamed chemicals again, evacuated the area. Fenced it off, labeled it contaminated, unsafe. The headlines vanished within a week, just like the people, just like me. I live in the hills now, far away. Off-grid, no phone, no calendar. Every year I burn my memories. I erase photos. I forget my name, because I know what happens when we remember. I know what crawls in the ash, and it only takes one spark.